Psychological and emotional abuse is invisible, so the wounds we carry can't be seen. Narcissistic abuse syndrome describes a cluster of symptoms experienced by someone who has been in a relationship with a narcissist or someone with antisocial personality disorder. It describes the effects on those who live or work with a narcissist's torturous behaviours and the consequences of that behaviour on their mental health. Now, the spectrum of narcissism exists on a continuum from healthy narcissism to unhealthy benign traits, all the way to pathological malignant narcissistic personality disorder. But wherever the narcissist lies on this spectrum, he doesn't have to display all of the traits associated with the full-blown pathological stage of NPD in order to inflict untold damage. I'll mention the most common symptoms a highly sensitive person, or anyone really who has gone through this, will tend to experience to a greater or lesser extent. I really want to bring this to light, particularly to this HSP community, because we often don't or can't identify why we feel the way we do. Enduring abusive relationships or growing up in abusive households, we learn to numb our feelings and we disassociate from our body just to survive the emotional, physical, and or spiritual abuse. And all survivors of narcissistic abuse develop a deep psychological wound called CPTSD. It typically develops in the aftermath of abuse, and it greatly affects our ability to function in the world, and it's like we're no longer the same person. CPTSD is complex post-traumatic stress disorder. It differs from PTSD in that it's due to repeated, ongoing, and prolonged exposure to a traumatic event, whereas PTSD, that most of us are familiar with, is due to a once-off traumatic event. Being in an unpredictable environment with a narcissist teaches us to live in a hyper-vigilant state as a way to protect ourselves from any possible harm. I like to describe it as you know you're going to get hurt, but you just don't know when. So you're constantly on alert. And being a highly sensitive person, this translates in us being in a continual state of over-arousal, always assessing the other person's energy and mood and behaviour. We just can't psychologically rest, simply because we are living in a threatening environment. We don't feel safe. And even though us highly sensitive people startle easily, this becomes an accelerated startle response. So we're even more jumpier and on edge. The thing with trauma is that we could be suffering from trauma and not realize it. The effects of trauma are far-reaching. For example, you may not even relate that your anxiety, depression, phobia, sleep disorder, or any other psychological symptom could be stemming from a childhood traumatic event, like living with a narcissistic parent. And trauma shapes our beliefs about the world, about ourselves, and the world becomes an unsafe place. Or we adopt the belief that I am bad because this happened to me. And this is where that toxic shame comes from. So a person experiencing narcissistic victim abuse syndrome will be emotionally dysregulated, meaning they will display obsessive behaviours, such as unrelenting thoughts about the abuser. They'll be replaying memories. They will doubt their ability to make decisions. They'll experience mood swings, including feelings of worthlessness, episodes of rage, anxiety, depression, feelings of paranoia, panic, and there'll be a need to withdraw from others. So we tend to feel really highly strung and like we're going mad, and we could even have suicidal thoughts. We will experience changes in appetite. There'll be weight fluctuations, so weight gain or weight loss. And the weight gain could be due to comfort eating, where we're trying to soothe our feelings of hurt and humiliation and anger. And the weight loss or controlling our food intake could be a way to help us restore some sense of control. So we try and control our food. We could also turn to alcohol and drugs to help us cope. Another interesting thing to look out for is neurotic stalking. So meaning that you'll have this obsession about wanting to know what, where, and why. The obsessive thinking could be related to wanting to make the narcissist happy or to gain their favor. There could be a tendency to excuse and ignore the narcissist's abusive action toward us. We could idealize the narcissist. Of course, we don't see it at the time. And this behavior is part of trauma bonding. So there are different stages. And another thing I'd like to mention is about developing phobias around things like events, dates, anniversaries, birthdays, even things like fearfully avoiding the phone or leaving your room. We may avoid certain thoughts, feelings, discussions, certain people. Basically anything that could possibly remind us of that person or the traumatic experience. And this is how we may be trying to avoid the triggers. One of the hallmark signs is an overwhelming and incapacitating fear. Things like nightmares, repeated flashbacks where you hear and see images in your mind. And victims of narcissistic abuse can continue to carry a sense of terror long after the traumatic relationship has ended. For us highly sensitive people, these relationships will make us even more sensitive. It's like we truly become hypersensitive. We develop an oversensitivity to any stress. It just feels like we can't cope with life at all. HSP experiencing narcissistic abuse syndrome will also have a feeling of self-condemnation, self-disgust, self-loathing, and it's an anger directed at yourself with many irrational thoughts and a sense of helplessness and hopelessness. Narcissistic abuse victims will have an imbalanced sense of responsibility, meaning that they tend to take full responsibility for the abusive behavior, which of course they don't see as being abusive. And that's because narcissistic abuse changes the way we perceive ourselves. So there's a tremendous sense of shame and guilt, inferiority, self-blame, and self-abandonment. We're constantly walking on eggshells. There's an intense feeling of being alone. So the narcissist may be there physically, but being a highly sensitive person, we sense like they're emotionally checked out. There's a feeling of emptiness and an indescribable coldness. So even though you eat or sleep beside them, there's a stark feeling of nobody being there. And this triggers a deep sense of abandonment and a strange sense of loss and grief. We lose interest in activities that we previously enjoyed, and we adopt a lot of avoidance behaviors. And physically, a person who experiences this will feel like their whole body is revved up, like you're chronically stressed. So cortisol and adrenaline will be through the roof, and being hyper-adrenalized is the basic emotional state. It's extremely exhausting. This constant and repeated state of over-arousal eventually leads to a feeling of numbness where you can't think or you can't cope with the simplest of things. And this is where the word zombie has been used to describe this stage. Our response to life, the environment, becomes delayed, and we feel like we're just existing in an automatic mode, not really interested in anything, emotionally detached, and we just don't care. A person going through this may also have the feeling that they are the only one who can truly see the nature of the abuser. So it really depends on your level of awareness and where you're at. Some people may not see it for a really long time. Others may see it and then be unable to cope with the reality. But generally, we are oblivious to our own emotional pain and we are disconnected from our own mental anguish. And instead, we tend to obsess with our own failures, inadequacy, And we're desperately seeking answers of how to solve the flaws that the narcissist has identified as being the cause of our misery. And this goes into narcissistic projection, where the narcissist will accuse you of being lazy, selfish, irresponsible, a liar, having anger issues, or being a cheat, when the truth is that they themselves are doing exactly what they're accusing you of. So all of this just keeps your mind spinning, questioning, you're confused, and it's meant to distort your reality. It's a form of psychological torture. People who experience CPTSD may become reckless, impulsive, and self-destructive, or they may start exhibiting psychosomatic illness. Relationships with narcissists are very destructive in more ways than one. It takes time, patience, self-love, and self-care to heal. You must move on from being or feeling like a victim of narcissistic abuse. It's an attitude change. Don't get fixated on what happened, because this can perpetuate the abuse and keep us stuck. In fact, moving on with your life is only something that you can do for yourself, and it's a process and it takes time. But moving on is the ultimate act of self-love and empowerment. Once we have accepted what has happened, then we can start educating ourselves. And knowledge allows us to re-nourish and replenish our self-worth. Reaching out to like-minded others soothes our sense of isolation. And many HSP who have been through this will say that it was the most profound experience of awakening to their own power, resilience, and authenticity. And I say this to you to restore your faith, because this experience won't sever your connection to infinite love, joy, peace, and abundance. With loving support, this experience can propel your life in a positive way.